You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinezic.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Kinezic, and welcome to episode 160. Another milestone. We got another 10 in the bank here. So.
They're all milestones.
And we're still in the time warp, the podcasting time warp, where we're talking in early-ish mid-May, and this isn't going to come out probably until
I think
it's either
June.
last week of May or first week of June.
Yeah.
So it's when people are listening, it's probably slightly warmer than it is now, and there's things some more in bloom. Your early spring stuff is faded away. So
this is a weird luxury for us because we've never had this much of a buffer, and it just seems odd. And I'm starting to get lost in time.
Yeah, and one of the things that has become a common occurrence here on our podcast is Fran throws me a curveball when he's editing something.
Oh, what did I do?
And when he edits you don't see. So our last guest was Captain Al Majeski from the American Literal Society.
Yeah.
And Fran forgot to take Captain out. So today I'm introducing Captain Uli Lorimer from the Native Plant Trust. And
I'll take it.
Yeah. So
Sorry
Uli,
about
why
that.
don't you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, how you got to the Native Plant Trust, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I'm Uli Lorimer. I'm the Director of Horticulture for Native Plant Trust. Just want to begin by saying it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me on the show. I've been up at Native Plant Trust now for 4 years as director. Previously worked at the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens in beautiful New York City for 14 years as curator of native flora. Had previous stint at Wave Hill, also in New York, for about 5 years. And then started off my public horticulture career at the U.S. National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. Hard to believe, but over 22 years ago, which is kind of crazy.
Time flies.
A long time ago. Yeah, that's for sure.
Just thinking about your career, one of the first things, you're dealing with native plants now. Was that always like a love or a focus, or is that something that you kind of shifted to over time as your career progressed?
I think it was a little bit of a gradual shift. I mean, I can say that I credit my green thumb from my mother and my mom's mother, so my grandmother in Germany. They both had. My mother's still alive, still has a beautiful garden, and that was always, as childhood, lots of memories spending time out there. And I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and I was always the kid who wanted to know what kind of tree it was, or like what was hiding underneath the log. And I think, I was just drawn to that. We used to go to Longwood Gardens all the time because it was like 10 minutes away from where I lived. And then when I went to University of Delaware to study horticulture, one of my independent studies was creating new labels for their native plant section in their little botanic garden. And so that, I think, kind of inched me in that direction. I think as I've learned more about plants, I have an appreciation for all plants and respect, even for the invasive ones, the ones that we like to vilify. But I feel like the sort of the value of native plants and what they mean in context and ecosystems and in sort of healing our damaged landscapes is what has continually drawn me deeper into this particular work. And I think that my time at Brooklyn Botanic Garden really sort of crystallized the approach that I'm taking now. And so, it's been a good nearly 20 years, 18 years in that direction. But, I love anything green, and even the plants that don't make chlorophyll. So
I completely appreciate that. I'm coming up on my 35th year in the industry. I've been at Pinelands coming up on 16 years. But I really only got it the way I get it now, maybe in the last 3 years. I'd say since the podcast, because I got it, I understood it, I was on board, but it wasn't until we started having these conversations that it kind of turned the volume up to 11 on it. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate all the other years in ornamental hort. the one thing you can't deny is people's passion towards plant material, whether it's native, non-native, or invasive. And there's something about that emotional connection that you can't deny and you can't refute either. You can't tell someone that they're wrong. Yeah. You may want to.
Well, or maybe flip it and say, maybe consider this as a different approach, instead of, saying, oh, this is wrong or I don't agree. But it's one of the, this is an industry where the knowledge is cumulative and it's built year after year, and it's very hands-on. And so after you've grown something many, many seasons in a row, you get this really deeper and fuller appreciation for it as an organism, as it's, in its own right. Especially if you grow things from seed. I think it's sort of this really wonderful circle of starting with the seed and nurturing it and getting it up to when it can be mature and flower and make it seed again, and starting that cycle again and again and again. I find that really fulfilling and really rewarding.
And and even that process has changed over time. Sorry if I'm getting so far off topic.
Oh, it's okay. We knew this one was going to. In fact, when I first saw Uli at a presentation I don't remember where we were. It was
February this year?
Yeah, it was in February, but I don't remember where it was. I was all over in February.
Baltimore.
It was Baltimore,
PPA in Baltimore.
I had literally, I'd been in Nashville for a meeting and landed at, I think, like 11 p.m. Didn't get home until like midnight, something like that. Fell asleep, woke up at 4 to drive down to Baltimore for that next meeting. So I kind of forgot. Yeah. But you said, hey, I can get as controversial as you want to get. So I'm okay going wherever we want.
But where I was going was, even the processes have changed and changed for the better. A native plant nursery 20 years ago didn't necessarily look at the best practices for growing a native plant. Because there was, chemical uses changed. Just a more, not saying that it's organic, but it's a more natural approach to how you do this to replicate things, which nurseries 25 years ago, whether it was a native nursery or non-native nursery, was, all maintained the same practice as if it was a farm. Because many of these nurseries were farms that kind of transitioned into plant stock as a crop. So even that has changed, and sometimes I feel a little bit like a dinosaur because Tom will ask my opinion. Like, we're going through something, how should we handle it? Well, when I dealt with that kind of thing 20 years ago, there's no way you would handle it the same way.
That is a good point, Frank, because there's a lot of times I say, hey, what would you do in this scenario? And not just to Fran, but other people who've been in the nursery industry for a long time. I'm like, well, 20 years ago, I would have sprayed some crazy thing that's banned now. I can't, but you can't even buy it, let alone we wouldn't even want to use it. But it's building on that knowledge base every day, and each year you come with a little bit more in the pocket, and then you still get frustrated when it doesn't work. So
well, it's one of the things I love about horticulture in general too, that you're allowed to make mistakes and you can learn from them, and try not to repeat the mistakes, but that you're always reevaluating and looking at, can I do this better? Is there maybe a more environmentally friendly way of doing it, or more efficient? And it kind of fosters a little bit of a spirit of innovation, which I really love too.
Yeah. I love that too. And you have everyone, you have the whole spectrum of, we love that people are seeing an opportunity selling native plants and not growing invasives, but then you still have the people that rely on invasives and they don't see the need to stop selling those plants. So it kind of runs the spectrum, but I think the industry as a whole keeps taking baby steps closer to doing the right thing. This whole
emphasis on baby steps.
Yes, baby. I mean, but people know what neonics are now, and why you shouldn't necessarily use them. And I love that that's public and more accepted, and more nurseries are seeing the need to go in that direction, which 15 years ago, I don't know if that conversation's happening, or people are going to whatever. I'll use it until they ban it.
Right.
So I'm happy at least that's moving in that direction. But I digress. we wanted to talk about what the Native Plant Trust is and the work that they do. And if you could tell our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with that, what it is that the Native Plant Trust does.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, Native Plant Trust is the first plant conservation organization in the country. In 2 years, we'll be celebrating our 125th anniversary, which is pretty crazy to think about. Wow. But we formally started as an organization in 1900, and have always been focused on plant conservation. Our headquarters and sort of flagship property is called Garden in the Woods. It's in Framingham, Massachusetts. And it is a 45-acre botanic garden, and also, as I said, headquarters for the organization. And so we run basically a three-legged stool out of this place, which is one leg is plant conservation. We have a now nearly 30-year program called the New England Plant Conservation Program, or NEPCOP for short. And it's a program where we work with all of the 6 states in New England, all of the natural heritage bureaus, federal entities, land trusts and so forth, to track and monitor the rarest and most endangered taxa that exist in the region. And so we've got about 30 years of monitoring data. We also have what I think is probably the most valuable room here on campus here is a seed bank that has nearly 30 years of rare plant seed collections. And so we've got nearly 75% of the 389 taxa banked, which is a real feather in our cap. In order to do this, we also engage in a volunteer citizen science program that we call our Plant Conservation Volunteers, or PCVs. Over that 30-year span, we've trained probably close to 1,600 volunteers, and we have about yearly somewhere between 400 to 500 volunteers active. So these are folks who, let's say, we're tracking a plant that exists in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. They live nearby, and they can pop in on the populations on their own time and check in and collect data. And of course, they all go through pretty rigorous training to get into this. But it's really a wonderful program because so many people are really energized and engaged and excited to do something for plant conservation. So that's one side of what we do. Then we have a public programs department where we offer about 150 to 200 online courses every year, including certificates in basic botany and advanced certificates in landscape design and botany and plant ID, along with a lot of sort of one-off courses that have anything to do with ecological horticulture, plant conservation, insect, bird life, mushrooms, how it all, trying to tie it all together. And then our horticulture department, we obviously maintain this botanic garden here. It's been in existence as a botanic garden since the 30s. And then we also operate a nursery facility in Western Massachusetts called Nasami Farm, where we produce plants all grown from wild collected seed, and of course all local ecotypes. And that services our retail arm, display purposes at the garden, as well as any kind of contract growing that we might do for land trusts, organizations like National Park Service, pretty broad strokes. And so we have our little pinky toe in the restoration world, so to say. So that's kind of the broad strokes of what Native Plant Trust does and is.
I have a question for each leg of that stool, actually. For the rare plant collection, what is the state of that as of today? Are there more things being added to it? Are we making progress? Are you finding more things having how they occur in the wild less often, or are things being encroached upon? Is it stable, or is it an uphill battle?
I think it's still, overall an uphill battle. And I don't know the exact date, but I want to say maybe 2010, we published a report called Flora Conservanda. And what this did is we got, 30 botanists in a room together from all the different states and looked at all the rankings and assessments and sort of took a snapshot of what is rare, what the trends are based on the data that we've collected over this 30-year period, what are the priorities, and that helps each state adjust the state rankings, likely in many cases things going from like S3, S2 down to S1 as habitat is lost and so forth. Some things, there's a few cases of successes, but mostly things becoming rarer. And we're currently in the process of revising Flora Conservanda and hope to have it published probably through Rhodora, which is the Journal of the New England Botanical Society, maybe the end of this year, early next year.
Awesome.
And so that's again another sort of another 10-year chunk in which the flora has changed, and so new things are being listed, new things are being discovered. Just for example, we discovered a population of velvet panic grass, Dicanthelium scoparium, which is pretty common down in Jersey, but just one population, I believe, or a handful of populations, and it's currently being proposed to be listed and added to Massachusetts list of endangered plants. So, new discoveries are always exciting. And the other sort of success I would say is that it was 3 years ago, pre-pandemic now, one of our PCVs discovered a enormous population of American chaff seed, which is Schwalbia americana. It's federally listed. It does exist in New Jersey, and it was part of the work I did for Brooklyn Botanic Garden was tracking some of those populations. This plant hadn't been recorded in Massachusetts since 1953, and they discovered a population with over 1,000 genets on a airfield strip. So, somebody had been mowing it to keep the vegetation low. It was sort of incidental management practices that led to this, amazing plant population persisting. And now it's like not extirpated from Massachusetts anymore. It's back on the map. And those are kind of success things that we can point to.
Yeah. Those are awesome success.
And the American chaff seed was actually someone's pick for their favorite native plant at the end.
Yes.
Friend, do you remember who?
Was it
Jay Kelly?
Yeah. Peter Groffman?
Not Peter Groffman, not Jay Kelly. It was Dr. Dwayne Estes.
Oh,
SGI.
Nice.
That was his. And then it was one I wasn't familiar with at the time, and I remember looking it up, and I remember seeing that there's a population that was in, I think, Tabernacle, New Jersey, or Chatsworth, New Jersey, not too far from where we're sitting right now. And I remember that, it was incredibly rare, except for New Jersey, and then the new population that was found recently.
And then it's down in South Carolina and Georgia and Florida is the sort of bulk of its range, but very cool plant, hemiparasitic, just a neat looking thing. So
it's awesome. I remember someone chose it. I couldn't remember who it was.
Yeah.
So going to the education leg of the stool, are you finding a growing interest, or are you finding you have to offer more classes or more education because the interest is there?
So we had transitioned a lot of our course offerings to online before the pandemic hit. And it was really out of the recognition that, while we're physically located here in central Massachusetts, we operate in all 6 states. And it's really hard for somebody who lives all the way up in Maine or something to drive all the way down here to take a class. And so we had already got the wheels spinning to offer everything online. And we were so well positioned when everybody was stuck at home to really see this, it was like a 25-30% growth in registrations and online courses every year of the pandemic, from 2019, 22, 21, all the way through till now. And it's folks from, Ohio and the Midwest and people in the Southeast. We were even getting people from Europe and South America tuning in that would have, we would never have had that kind of a broad reach. And so it's, you know, it kind of illustrates the power of the virtual platform. The other flip side of the coin is that, you know, it's really hard to translate hands-on education, like seeing an actual physical plant and learning plant ID as you can touch it and look at it in the garden into an online platform. So that's sort of the, you know, the catch-22 of it. There's, you know, the interest is definitely there. The registrations are, you know, through the roof. And now our challenge is how to adapt the virtual platform as best as we can to try to make it as you know, as an engaging an experience if you're looking through a screen, as if you could actually, you know, stick your nose into a Trillium erectum and get that delicious fragrance. You know, that's something we don't think we can reproduce, but
no, I appreciate this part of what you do because, and we talked about it before we went on air, is just framing things in a positive light, and people are coming away with the correct, I think the correct view of how these things should be looked at. And we talk about all the time some of the bad behavior we see in certain social media groups. That's we were just talking about it the other day. All the time. You know, and having our own Facebook group for this, we just had a influx of new members. And, you know, it's funny that the outside perspective of people coming into, even though you think everyone's behaving kind of well, you start getting some outside perspectives, and you're like, oh, you know, maybe this even needs to be tightened up a little bit. Like it's which is a good thing. You always have to keep looking at it. You always have to keep adjusting it. You always have to keep moving forward. But I appreciate the educational reach that's framed in such a way that people are walking away in a very positive manner from it, and that's not always the case.
No, and that's really key for us, and it's something that, you know, as a person who's, you know, deep in it with decades of experience, it's sometimes hard to appreciate the perspective of someone who's new to the world. And, you know, I try not to approach these conversations with a whole lot of assumptions, like, you know, maybe they don't know what an ecotype is, or like, you know, these things that you and I might take for granted because we've been doing it for so long. And I think that the ability to leave somebody with like a favorable impression is all about a positive and welcoming message, and not having it, you know, I'm not trying to lecture you. I'm not trying to position myself as somehow more knowledgeable or better than your choices. Just saying, here's this information. And, you know, I think an educated visitor or consumer will be able to make the right choice far more than somebody who is unaware of the complexity of issues or the nuances that are there.
Totally. You only get that one chance at a first impression, and it's wonderful that they're getting that great first impression from you.
Totally.
Third leg, and this is actually a two-pronged question, is what are your challenges in supply for the native plant nursery in getting the plants that people want into their hands? And you know, we're fans of local ecotype. We would just love to hear why you feel local ecotype is important. And is it as the industry as a whole, is it too broad or too narrow, or both at the same time, depending on what you're looking at?
Well, and so I think that currently, I think the horticulture industry is still very broad and still very focused on aesthetics, you know, and I look at some of the periodicals that I receive, and I try to get a lot of magazines because it's interesting to see, you know, who bought ad space and what are they promoting, and what are like this year's hot plants. You know, sorry, visitors didn't see me make air quotes in my hands, but I'm just gonna put that in there. You know, so on some level, it's just kind of repackaging things that already exist out there. But I think for us, the message of trying to elevate ecological function and value and have that weighed equally with aesthetics is the way forward. And I think that, you know, the knowing where plants come from makes sense if you can talk about how all the other life that interacts and that's interconnected with the plant itself or the plant community is all subject to the same sort of timing and like all these complex relationships that we can't necessarily see. And that when you begin bringing in things from other places, the timing is mismatched. The resource itself, whether it's a particular plant that provides a particular quality of pollen or nectar to a pollinator, is compromised, or here's foliage that we've selected to be dark maroon because it looks cool, but all the things that eat that particular plant can't begin with it because they don't recognize it as food anymore. It's that sort of thinking that being intentional about supporting all the life is really the reason behind local adaptations and why local ecotypes are important. I would go further to say that one of the other elephants in the room here is climate change. And we get a lot of questions about should I plant a tree from Virginia and Massachusetts today because all the climate models say that by 2050 it's going to feel like Virginia. And to which I would say that may be true, but we don't have to make it look like Virginia. And I think that right. I mean, go back to Lady Bird Johnson, who famously quipped, "Let's keep Texas looking like Texas," or something like that. I may have misquoted her, but the point is that, like, you're looking to embrace what makes your region special and distinct from, it's why New Jersey doesn't look like New York and it doesn't look like Massachusetts, because there are these subtle differences in the landscape. And that's what we're trying to preserve. And I think that the embracing the genetic diversity that's here already will allow those plants to be able to adapt, rather than trying to, garden the wild, so to say, by bringing it forward and introducing things. Now, pragmatically, thanks to mail order, people have been bringing stuff from all over the place anyway. Yeah. And this is one of the things that I'm always keen to point out, that practice has already far outstripped what research is telling us is happening. And but you need to be aware of that to be able to make more informed choices. Yeah. For us, getting back to one more question there. The biggest challenge is seed, availability of seed for us in terms of our nursery supply. And the other usual things as a nonprofit, sufficient labor and other resources play into why we don't produce more. But the bottom line is that there's not enough available seed.
I just had this conversation literally yesterday afternoon with our propagator, and on some of the properties, we collect all on mostly private property. And we were talking about the age of some of the people. One of our contacts is getting ready to retire in the next 3 years. And a couple places that are very important to us, we may only have one contact. And what does that mean? If we were to lose these two places as a whole, our nursery would be a completely different place in the next 5 years, and how important it is to have these sources, but collect responsibly, have a hand in wanting those sites to succeed and produce and become better, not leave it worse for what it is. And it's, as time goes on with development and other things, it gets increasingly harder to be able to do that kind of work and supply enough plant material to do the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to touch on that you said too was how, with mail order, you have stuff that's coming in from all over the place. But even with your normal garden center, there's more and more interest in native plants. And the garden centers aren't necessarily looking at ecotype and all that. They're just going to their normal outlets and saying, well, what native plants do you have? And sometimes you're lucky enough to get something that's at least native to your area, but even the ecotype could be, a lot of these plants have really broad ranges. This was something that was fascinating when I found out. You have a lot of native species, U.S. native species that are then taken by some of these big seed companies that are based out of Europe, and then they're doing all kinds of breeding over there and then sending them back here. So it's a native species here, like a Monardididum is one that always comes to mind. I can't remember the cultivar name, but it's a U.S. species, but all the breeding was done in Holland, and then it's brought back here and then still sold as a native species in a sense.
Yep. And all clones of one another.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
But we internally have this dilemma too. Tom and I have the discussion, like, I love Amsonia, but it's really only native to 3 counties in Arkansas. Do I put it in my property, even though it survives here? Like, I planted oak leaf hydrangea, its natural range isn't this far north. Mm-hmm. So even though I know the right thing to do, I'm still pushing the boundaries of, is that right or is it wrong? And at what point is it okay? And I don't know that answer. And I don't know that you can say that's wrong to do or that's right to do. It's I kind of justify it by saying, well, it's not a non-native, even though it's not native to this area, and it's not an invasive.
Yeah. Well, I think that the key here, as I see as the real next, and these are like achievable steps for the nursery industry, and it all revolves around transparency. Mm-hmm. Right. It's transparency in propagation techniques. So, if people see a plant name, do they know that it's patented and therefore cloned? Do they know that it's a selection from the wild and maybe it comes true from seed? Or if it is a selection from the wild and it comes true from seed, where was it selected from? Mm-hmm. Like, none of that information is at all available. And, I tried to find this for a talk. I had to troll through patent applications to find information about parentage and where did so-and-so find this plant and what did they do with it to produce this particular selection or cultivar. I think all of that, and then provenance, correct me if I'm wrong, Fran, but, maybe 30, 40 years ago, people started things smaller and grew them all the way on and then sold them. And now we're in an industry where, you've got people that specialize in liners and they sell them really cheap, and then they get sent out to a wholesaler that then pots them up or so forth. And then that gets sold on to a retailer, and that whole documentation chain of where that plant came from is completely broken.
Mm-hmm. It gets lost, and you can control it if you're collecting the seed and you're growing it on, but you can find street species being grown bare root locally, but where that seed source came from or where that chain is, that you can't even get those answers sometimes. Yeah. And when you do get the answers, you don't want the answer. You're like, oh, that's not what I was hoping for. I've had the opportunity throughout my career to work for 2 very large nurseries that were rooted in natives, like Princeton Nurseries, rooted in natives. We grew from seed all the way out, but also had so many patents that it was unreal. And when I worked at the Connor Pyle Company, they owned more patents than any other nursery. Yep. But they had a focus on natives. They love natives, and they were the first ones to say that I remember, hey, Lythrum is appearing to be invasive. We need to stop growing it. Miscanthus is appearing to escape. Yeah. We need to stop. And we did a lot of street species natives, but the patent arm of that nursery made more money than the rest of the nursery. At Princeton, those patents, those companies made more money than you did actually producing plants to sell. So I understand, like, by speaking out against it, Tom keeps saying I'm going to wake up not come to work one day. Speaking about between talking about honey as a business and cultivars, but I'm not poo-pooing them. I'm not saying, I still, my attitude has really changed. Is if a cultivar is someone's gateway into it, I'll take that over time if they can learn. All right, I started with this. This is doing better, but I can even do better by doing this. Yeah,
absolutely.
But it is really a marketing arm that has so many dollars behind it. I don't know if the only way you can stop it is for people to stop buying those plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I think I always look at the analogy of, like, the local Ace Hardware versus a Home Depot. It's like you can't, maybe there's somebody who values supporting the local business enough, but they can't offer the volume discount that a Home Depot can. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges facing the native plant industry, and sort of in terms of the nursery portion of it. How do you compete against Connor Pyle or a Monrovia or, really big name nurseries? And, and even the smaller, as you pointed out, even the smaller nursery centers oftentimes just source their stuff from the same, industrial scale production. Yeah. We mentioned earlier neonicotinoids. I mean, this is another thing, like, be transparent about what you put on the plants. Even like Proven Winners is one that always gets me, right? Proven Winners says that all the liners they produce they're not made with or not treated with any neonicotinoids, but they say nothing about any of the partners that they send the liners to who then grow them up and put them in the pots that say Proven Winners.
Mm-hmm. We had that same,
no way to guarantee it.
We had that same conversation with a nursery owner that says, even though I'm not certified organic, my practices are organic and I'm not using neonicotinoids, but I buy that liner in, and I don't necessarily always know that nursery's practices when I get that material. So even though I'm not doing it, I'm not saying it hasn't happened somewhere down the line. And that's just following the chain. And you can't expect the average homeowner buying plants, at least not right now. There's people thinking about it, but you can only get so far. It's like researching your family tree. Yeah. It's I don't know how much time and effort people are willing to go down that rabbit hole before they give up.
Yeah, and I feel like the transparency also risks, information being put out there that some nursery owners or producers don't want people to know about. Mm-hmm. That's why there's a resistance to it. I think that the only way to push forward is, it's kind of like grassroots in the same way. I think there's some interesting overlaps with organic farming, for example, and that, a lot more people know what like an heirloom vegetable is now than they did before. And they know about community supported agriculture, and they know about farmers markets and like all this small scale that's happening all over this country. And it's really fantastic. And, maybe 10 years ago, you would say, you want me to pay $5 for a tomato? Are you kidding me? And now you look at the thing and you're like, it's definitely worth it because it's not grown. I'm putting this thing inside my body. So I know that it's going to be healthy for me. And I know it's going to taste way better than any, grocery store bought one because it was just picked the day before. Yeah. And I feel like native plants have sort of a similar local affinity. And that you can say, if you're so careful about what you put into your body, why don't you extend the same thing to all the other organisms that rely on that plant? Like, you don't want to poison yourself with pesticides. Why would you want to do it to the insects, the butterflies, maybe the bird that eats the caterpillar is going to get a piece of that too. And to support, the broadest strength, you want to know that your seed didn't come from Georgia and then traveled to Tennessee and then was sold to a wholesaler in Virginia that then shipped it up to New Jersey, and there you have it. Like, that's the same reason why people go to the farmer's market to get their salad instead of buying the clamshell that came from California. Yeah. Some people are going to care. Some people won't, that's, I'm not deluded into thinking, we're going to change the world here, but.
And that's a conversation, that keeps happening. For example, like locally, oaks aren't really producing. They haven't for the last few years a decent mast, enough to collect, enough to produce. And we've had that conversation where it's like, all right, there's no swamp milkweed. We just won't have a crop this year. All right, second year, we won't have a crop this year. Third year, do we need to outsource acorns for this? Like, is there somewhere close locally collected, that someone that we can trust, where we know where they're coming from, that is close enough? And we share that information with our customers. If they call up and say, hey, I need to know the provenance of X, Y, and Z. And we're like, oh, yeah, this county, we did it. Right. This one we had to bring in. It's a little further out. We understand if you don't want to use it. But it's an option, and we trying not to let perfect be the enemy of good, in some
totally. I mean, you try to work within the ecoregions or whatever provisional seed transfer zones that people are talking about. And I think that gives you a broader geographic range to try to work within. But absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, that's, we don't live in a perfect world. And I I think if you really take a step back, we're all doing fantastic work, even if it's not entirely perfect all the time.
No, and we kind of say all the time, there's not enough of us doing it. Like, you would think that's crazy to invite more people to do this, but there really isn't enough, especially if you start breaking it down by ecotype. All right, if there's more people up north and we're not selling our material up north, maybe we have more material. Like, there's definitely material coming into New Jersey from south. You know, if you have more people thinking that way, you're just shipping more locally than elsewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, we want that entire pie to get bigger. Though I always talk about why we started the podcast. That was one of the reasons we started the podcast, just to kind of raise awareness so people realized the impact they could make locally, no matter what their passion was. It didn't necessarily have to be plants. It could be insects or fishing or all different kinds of stuff, hiking. Yeah. But it all kind of tied back into these habitats, which one of the foundations is the plants.
Stay tuned for more of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
I mean, hunting too is another one. I feel like, you know, if you love hunting, you want to be out in, you know, good habitat, because that's where the animals are going to be. But I do want to bring back to something you were saying earlier, Fran, about the kind of people aspect of all of this. And I think it's a sort of troubling, the pipeline, so to say, of younger folks getting interested in this and being competent as seed collectors, for example. There's less and less. I mean, we have the same issue with we have a couple contract seed collectors for us, and they're wonderful, but you know, they're getting older and, you know, less able, less willing to get out there. And what do you do with the things that you always relied on this person to source for you? It's really troublesome. And you know, it goes back to, you know, maybe university programs. I don't know how else to get people interested in a career in this kind of work, and really demonstrating that it is economically viable to do and incredibly rewarding. You know, and it's not, you're not going to be able to afford a Porsche doing this, but you're going to see some things that few other humans have been able to see. And I feel like that's got to be the hook.
There's a gap in the employee chain where, when I started, I didn't go to college, and there were college graduates, but there were plenty of people that had just worked in the industry their entire lives and were willing to share that information with the right people and pass it along, and you worked your way through. It's kind of hard when you're spending $80,000 on education now to come in and say, "Oh, this is all I'm going to make." This is difficult. You're missing that link where the information is being passed down to the next generation. Yeah. There's somewhere we missed a generation, and that information is kind of dying and not being passed on. We've been our system. We've been advertising for an assistant propagator for over a year, 2 years. Mm-hmm. We have our propagator is one of the best propagators in the industry. Like, this as a learning curve, to be able to learn from one of the best before he retires. We can't get get an applicant.
Well, I'd rephrase that, because we've gotten there's a lot of people who want to get into it because they like nature, they like gardening, but for that position in particular, we're looking for someone who has a little bit more experience than the applicants that have been coming in. But it's an interesting conundrum. Is the folks who have more of a horticultural background aren't necessarily going into native plants, but you have a lot of people who don't have their experience with horticulture has mainly been from a hobby standpoint. And they're really into native plants, and they want to learn more. And
But you also need that next generation to infuse you with new technology, new practices, bring something new to the table, and embrace the old. And there's this just weird gap in between where it's not happening.
Yeah, I sometimes question about how much of a learning curve can you accept to try to bring people in.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like you're looking for a unicorn, you're looking for that person who's like, like we used to joke about the rare breed of double nerd. He'd be like tech savvy and know about plants. And you're like, wow, like who is that person? Do they exist? And when you find them, you're like, wow, this is great. Do everything you can to hold on to them. And, I find for us here and our approach to horticulture is so very different than traditional horticulture or anything that you would learn at a more mainstream botanic garden. And so there's already a little bit more of a learning curve to bring people up to speed with how do we approach maintenance of the grounds? How do we approach, bringing new plants into the collection and onto the grounds? We're not just shopping at mail order catalogs. And a lot of this also reflects an evolution, as we were talking before. There was a time where horticulture here was interested in plant breeding, and there was a couple of cultivars that were released. And then our nursery at one point was also, buying liners in from Tennessee and potting them up, and we were really applying a much more narrow definition and scope in terms of what we think is regionally appropriate or ecotypic based on this ecoregions concept. And for us, if I want to include something new in the garden, we want to go see it in the wild first, and we want to collect it from the wild and then figure out how to grow it best, and then produce like 100 or 500 to put on display and bring it in that way. But that requires sometimes 3-4 years from, if we could grow that, to like, here it is in the garden. Yeah. And that's like that level of patience just is sometimes hard.
No, but it's hard, but important, because if you want people to follow your lead, you have to walk the walk. And those steps aren't easy steps to take sometimes. They do take time, and it takes patience. And it's hopefully, when it's all said and done, it's worth it, and everyone sees why the effort is important. And you can't do it unless you're doing it,
Yeah.
So it's there, speaking of which, with some of the former philosophies to today, Native Plant Trust wasn't always a name. There was a name change. What was the reasoning behind the name? Was that part of it?
No, it was. So we used to be known as New England Wildflower Society, and that name had been in use from early 70s up until 2019, I think. And then before that, it was the New England Wildflower Preservation Society. And then I think we started off as the Society for the Preservation of Wildflowers, or something like so, some iteration of that combination of words. And we felt that it didn't really reflect the full breadth of what the organization did. We would get kind of silly questions like, do you guys do stuff with trees and ferns? I mean, it says wildflowers, so it's also an awful lot, like try to do a radio spot with New England Wildflower Society. It's just it was a lot of words and syllables. And so Native Plant Trust seemed a little bit more concise, and I think a little bit more indicative of the breadth of activities that we do from conservation, education, and public horticulture. And so that was the reason behind the name change, as we've been known as New England Wildflower Society for, close to 40 years. So,
I was curious with, we talked about like increased amount of interest from people that know this and love it. We find the voices get louder on both sides. What are some of your obstacles that you kind of stumble against in spreading that native plant? It seems like for the amount of people that you have with a growing love of native plants, I find the people that don't, that feel kind of we're spreading like some kind of magic, that their voice is getting just as loud. Do you have obstacles in that way? Or is it all, hey, we keep getting more people, we're spreading the right message, we're moving forward?
I think we do keep attracting folks and more people are hearing it. I think that our biggest obstacles are that the message isn't being spread widely enough, or that the right people aren't hearing it. And so, I think about all of the public speaking that I do, and it's almost always at native plant conferences. And it's sort of like preaching to the choir there. Everybody who's there is already on board with the message. But I would love to talk more with, nursery and landscape associations or real estate conferences, where people who design new subdivisions, and they've got their same go-to landscape architect that puts in the same 25 plants and little meatballs and that. And what they don't understand is that they're crafting an aesthetic that is so entrenched in this country around, and it's an aesthetic that you can draw a direct line to formal gardens in Europe. All right. So people want clean lines, mulch, clipped hedges that kind of look like, the hedges you see in the fancy English garden magazines, and color, and lots of color, and better yet, a garden that does all that I don't have to interact with or do anything to. And throw on top of that our obsession with lawns. And what I get so frustrated with is that, I drive around and like the shopping center has all the same boring plants in it, and the corporate park looks neat and tidied up like it was designed in the 50s. And many of the residential neighborhoods here, where's the person turning their front yard into a pollinator habitat? Very few, because they're afraid to stick out, or there's some homeowner association stuff that's like, slaps them on the wrist if they have a yard that's deemed unkempt or untidy. All those things are like anathema to ecology. It wants to be messy. So how do you shift the aesthetic towards a little bit wilder and looser and away from the formality? Yeah, that's a huge challenge.
It is huge. And Tom sits on the New Jersey Nursery Landscape Association board. And it's amazing how many people kind of have their heels dug in, because, because it's their livelihood and it's what they built their whole career on. And to come back and say, hey, maybe I was wrong about this, is a tough conversation to have with someone that you've been telling, steering in a certain direction, to say, I was wrong, go in this direction. Yeah. Like, I look at, I drive around my neighborhood and I can go to the local supermarket and it's completely landscaped with burning bush and barberry. And I think, well, how do you change that? Where does that change start? Does it start with the landscapers? Because I've heard my neighbor have a conversation with the local, with who mows their lawn about plants, and he's giving his idea, but he's not an expert in plants. He saw an opportunity. Like, I know the kid. He saw an opportunity to make money mowing lawns. So now he's the one giving advice about plants, but he's not really qualified to give that advice. Yeah, and it's funny because we'll go on family walks in the development across the street from our house every once in a while, and I find it infuriating. It's supposed to be relaxing. We're going on this family walk. I get so angry walking through this development because it's burning bush, berberis, green giant arborvitaes. Some of which have been pruned to look like seashells, which they're spiral.
Oh, very, very creepy.
Oh yeah. Oh, and then what really makes me the most upset is all these trees are mulched at least a foot up the trunk. Volcano. It's it's like the Mount Vesuvius of mulch volcanoes is the Krakatoa. They're enormous. And I made a couple videos because I'm I got to put this out there, and I'm I probably shouldn't, in being on the New Jersey Nursery Landscape Board. I shouldn't be saying, hey, if your landscaper is doing this, you should probably look for a different landscaper because they don't know what they're doing. I
hadn't said anything.
I guess I said it now.
Sorry to cut you off. Yeah. I hadn't said anything, but I'm working on a video that will come out. Yeah. I'll do it, but it's every time I see a weeping cherry planted 5 foot from the corner of a house, I take a small video, and I'm going to just do a whole mess of them strung together, and then what a full-size weeping cherry looks like.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up moving, and that's just someone that you're putting your faith in, someone that you think are an expert. And I don't consider myself an expert, but it's just I don't want to just say these are all the things that are wrong. You want to do it in a positive manner, but sometimes the best way is just to show this is what you're planting here. This is what this tree will become.
Yeah, and it's I guess where I get frustrated, I'm looking at all this, and you're treating plants as lawn ornaments. Like you had a giant garden gnome is the equivalent of having that one green giant that's next to your doorway. It's an ornament. And then I'll come back and look at my front yard, which is wild and can look a little out of control at times, but I know it's alive. And I'll go up and I'll get close, and there's insects all over the place. And there's all kinds of things that utilize my garden that is not happening across the street. And, Well,
that's the whole thing. And
yeah.
That's when we had Melinda Soltis on to talk about homeowners association, the one letter she got was, I can't imagine anyone would want to attract wildlife to their property. And that's,
I was going to say, if you want insects, there's a lot of people who are total bugophobes that think you should be, nuking everything that flies to death because it might sting me, bite me, or make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes spreading that number, this is a good segue, sometimes spreading that number is working together. And I think this is maybe a good time to talk about joining together to spread a louder message. And I see that with the Northeast Seed Network. And if you would like to speak a little bit about that, I know we've mentioned it a little bit. We've had Eve Allen on, and she's talked about it, but that was really in the infancy of it.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to, because we're really excited about this initiative, and it's really gathering steam and momentum and interest this year. The Northeast Seed Network is an effort that's being led by Native Plant Trust and Ecological Health Network with a lot of other partners, including Pinelands, that is looking to increase the availability of source-identified, genetically diverse seed for the use in landscapes in the Northeast. So this can be either for restoration projects or to feed into retail, wholesale nursery production, because we really believe that there's a great demand for this kind of plant material, and there is no coordinated effort nor the proper infrastructure in place to be able to pull this off in our region, and that's what we're really trying to address. It's exciting because it also really represents a much larger, broader platform. If we bring all of our partners together and behind this message, I think we can really amplify it a lot louder than any one of us singly can. And I think that's really one of the amazing opportunities that this network represents. Aside from the actual product itself, the seed, I think it's an opportunity not only to reach across the nursery industry, the botanical garden industry, but we have some really exciting partnerships with the organic farming community here, which is another huge, I'm just so excited about this particular partnership because I think, agriculture and restorations have sometimes been at loggerheads a little bit about, what do farms plant and how do they escape out and so forth. And I think that, again, there's this shift now in that we're finding ways to work together for the benefit of the planet, for the benefit of their crops, for the benefit of all the local ecosystems. So I'm really excited about that message getting out there. This network will we're building at our nursery facility in Western Massachusetts a much larger, expanded seed storage facility. In other words, cool, dry storage and more freezer space for our rare plants. Another facility for bulk seed cleaning. And we're really going to try to lean into this idea of seed increase plots. I know this is something that you guys have been doing for quite some time now, but has been really largely absent in the sort of northern parts of the Northeast, so in New England and other places. And we're really looking to ramp that up because it's the only way in which we can meet the demand that's out there. Aside from the issues of dwindling expertise, it is not sustainable to collect only from the wild. And if you start with that mantra of doing no harm, there's no way that we can ever collect enough seed consistently from wild populations to grow the amount of plants or even provide, DOTs want thousands of pounds of seed. Like, where's that? You're not going to hand collect that from the wild.
If you did, they wouldn't be willing to spend the money for what you'd have to charge for it.
Yeah, you'd need collection teams, and it's not feasible.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we're really excited about this initiative because I think it's we're glad we're doing it now. In hindsight, which should have been done 10 years ago, but we're trying to keep looking forward and really trying to keep our eye on filling this obvious or widening this bottleneck so it's more like a highway instead of a single lane road.
Well, it's sparking the conversation, and I love the fact that conversation's also being had with the people that need to have the conversation with DOTs and those types of government entities that are thinking in that manner. Mm-hmm. They're shifting from just turf and regular turf maintenance. The other thing I admire is that the Native Plant Trust is willing to take on this type of thing only because from us having done it, the amount of infrastructure and upfront money that goes into that before you can even really think about seeing a profit is hard. It's hard to take that leap knowing it's going to take a while to pay off because it's a lot of it. You start talking about seed cleaning and plots and collecting. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of money put out before you see a return. And it's we understand the commitment that you're making, and we appreciate that commitment because it's not easy.
I think I also need to thank our, some of our very generous donors that are helping us do this, as well as the federal government. We've got a really wonderful agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is helping us to get this network off the ground too. And it points to the importance of public-private partnerships in particularly in the Northeast, where you've got a landscape that has a relatively small percentage of land owned by federal entities and state entities, but the overwhelming majority is owned by private individuals or land trusts and private organizations. And so I see that as one of the big challenges is really being able to coordinate all these different pieces in service of this mission.
I love one of the things I noticed right away when you look at the people who are involved. One of the things I love seeing is that there are some nurseries involved that aren't your traditional native plant nurseries or places that aren't. And I love that they see this as an opportunity, but they could easily dig their heels in and fight against it. But they see it as this is a conversation we need to be a part of moving forward. And how can we be a part of it? And how can we do better? And it's some notable names on that list. It's nice to see them moving in that direction and thinking in that manner. And I don't know if that happens without the Northeast Seed Network. Maybe eventually it does, but
this picking up on some of the earlier threads too, that I think that the overall message is really beginning to filter out into more public and broader audiences and broader spheres. And, you can look at this in any number of different ways, that non-native plant nurseries are finally interested in it is one certainly way. I gave a talk for the Garden Clubs of America, their national meeting last year, that was held in Boston, and it was all about native plants. Yeah. And I was really surprised. They're full bore behind this message. They're trying, in fact, they were successful in designating this past April as National Native Plant Month. Mm-hmm. And they're currently after all of the governors in the states in which their clubs are active to permanently designate April as Native Plant Month. I mean, this is all great messaging, and whatever you think about garden clubs, don't mess with those ladies, man. They are a powerful group and wonderful group that is really not to be trifled with whatsoever.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I know
it's hard to trump passion.
Garden Clubs of America, they had a meeting in D.C., and one of their speakers was Kyle Leibarger from Native Habitat Project, and Dr. Dwayne Estes was there as well. So I think they actually went up together. But so they are still on that push with native plants, and we've seen it across the nursery industry too. There's my brother and I had a visit up in New England last week, where there's a large large nursery just interested not just in, they actually did a lot with native plants already, primarily cultivars, but they want to do a lot more with just species native plants, and they're asking ecotype questions. They didn't always agree with everything, but they're thinking about it. And this is, like, again, one of the larger nurseries on the East Coast. So there's the tide is starting to shift. Fran and I were talking about last week that native plants have been on every nursery and garden and like hot list for the 10 trends for this next year. Native plants have been on that list for as long as I've been involved with the nursery, last 7-8 years, probably even longer. This is the first time I'm really seeing where it's actually picking up steam. Yeah.
And it feels really good. I gotta say.
It does.
It really does.
So for the sake of time, I'm going to move it. We're going to have to do a part 2, because I'm just looking at what time it is. And I was like, we didn't even get to half the stuff.
I don't even know if we really looked at the questions. I didn't.
I crossed off a couple. That was it. But before we go to our last question, what are some of the goals for you personally and the Native Plant Trust moving forward? Is there some things that you're working towards that maybe haven't been announced yet, or is there some near goals that you're hoping to see or meet in the near future?
Well, so first, to really successfully launch this seed network, I think is the primary challenge. And we're building the infrastructure this year. And so hopefully by fall, we'll have all of those facilities online and can actually begin, accepting collections and really getting the ball rolling. We're hiring a Northeast Network seed coordinator position. We've got a bunch of great candidates now. We just got to, in all my free time in the spring, I got to find time to schedule some interviews. But no, so that's moving along. I think other than that, I'm really interested in continuing to kind of hone in on what exactly ecological horticulture is and what does it mean in terms of your approach to gardening, whether it's landscaping kind of broadly writ with a lot of the folks that are maintaining landscapes in the region here. What are maintenance practices that we can try to look at, and really continue to hone in on why we think local adaptation is the key for the future and for the health of all the ecosystems. So, and that's going to kind of bear itself out through, interpretations and resources that we're going to develop here. Maybe some more publications. I wrote a book last year, called, Native Plant Primer, that Timber Press published, and it's been very well received, and it was really aimed at non-professionals. And so continuing to develop those kinds of resources, I think is definitely in the works for the coming years.
It's funny that you say non-professionals. I was thinking even for professionals, it's amazing like how easy it is to get lost in your work and lose that human element, even when you're dealing with ecology. And just how to help spread that message. One of the things I think we all need to look for, if you're involved in this and you're passionate about it, we kind of all owe it to the work that we do to do our part. And I love the book that you put out, and I think that sends a great message. And that's you do more than your part. You do my part too. So I appreciate that. Thank you for picking up my slack. So we always end with the same question. I know we joked about it before we went on the air. It's the simplest yet most difficult question that we ask, and we always save it for last. Personally, what Tom and I love from this, it's not so much the plant you choose, but the reason why you choose it. And that's, what is your favorite native plant?
Well, so I've had a good long time to think about this one since right before we got on air here. I would like to reframe the question and answer, what is my current plant crush?
That's perfect. Love it.
Because as we mentioned before, it's hard to pick just one, and it changes. Maybe it changes daily. Maybe you've always had a soft spot for something. And so I'm going to start with a broader group, which are our native ferns, and I'm going to drill down to maidenhair fern as my current crush right now. Right. And so we're still a little bit further behind in spring than I think y'all are down in New Jersey, and I just love ferns as they first emerge out of the ground, and they look kind of like otherworldly and tightly curled, and these little geometries and spirals that kind of play inside each other. And maidenhair fern has this really lovely dark maroon stem that emerges, and then it slowly unfurls, and the foliage is almost kind of coppery to begin with, and you get a nice big stand of it, and it just looks so delicately as it, kind of drifts a bit in the breeze. And then it expands into this beautiful thing. And then it's like that for the rest of the season. And so part of why I choose it is because I'm really trying to lean in and appreciate the ephemeral nature of that stage of its life. And so it's kind of fleeting, and it's like even from one day to the next, you'll see they've expanded a little bit more. And it's sort of, for me, one of the big reasons to go outside and really slow down and observe plants, because they're beautiful in every stage of their life. And if you walk by too fast, you're going to miss something really amazing. That
is a wonderful, that hits home for me. Tom, I don't even know if he realized it, got me completely, this year more than ever, completely hooked on ephemerals after they did a controlled burn on their property for quail habitat. And there were ephemerals there, but how quickly they came back.
I don't know if it was the burn itself that made them more
daylighting,
more prevalent, or was it that there just wasn't stuff in the way and you could see them better. Yeah. But it just seemed like they were really there were so many this year.
Yellow trout, lily, and white
anemone,
anemone, and
Mayflower,
it's just so many Canada Mayflowers blooming now. So, but it got me out more, like every week, and I'm like, what else? They're going to go away. Like I have to see them. I have to see them now. What else can I see?
It's one of the most. I think it's one of the things that makes northeastern woodlands so special. Is this like time in April and May where all this amazing stuff comes up and then it fades away, and if you don't pay attention, you'll miss it. Exactly.
That's a wonderful choice. That's one I will remember, definitely.
Yeah.
So this is the point in the show where we kind of hand the floor over to you. We do our final thoughts, and we give you the time and you use it however you'd like to use it. You can summarize, promote something, mention something we didn't talk about something coming up at the Native Plant Trust, but however you choose to use it, the floor is yours, and I hand it over.
Thank you. Well, I will begin again with a heartfelt thanks to both you, Fran and Tom, for a wonderful conversation. I am completely up for part 2.
Awesome.
Whenever we can get that on the books. I think that we've talked a lot about promoting the use of native plants in a lot of different contexts. And I wanted to bring up this idea of 2/3 native or 70%. This is something that's been increasingly kind of bandied about as a goal for folks to aim at. And I think it's great to have the goal. And the reason for it is that every person is on their own sort of journey in pursuit of that, or maybe not in pursuit of that. But welcoming these plants into your garden is a really easy step to do. And I think you will find that making that choice is empowering, and it's really rewarding when you see what is attracted to your garden and how it feels more like it fits in with the surrounding landscapes by making those choices. And that if you have 20% native, that's great. You welcome a few more and you keep working yourself towards that goal. The other thing I really like about the sort of 2/3 number is that the remaining third is plenty of space for plants that maybe they're not native, but they're good garden plants. They play well and with others. Maybe you've got a beautiful peony that you inherited from your grandmother that just has this nostalgic connection with your family. There's room for that in gardens. And really the bigger message here is that we're not trying to be extremists. We're not anti-ornamental, nor do you have to be 100% native, but aiming for that goal. The reason that's there is because it's been shown to support the greatest breadth of insect life, the greatest breadth of bird life, and all the connections that you might see or not be able to see in a landscape. And so I really want to encourage people to welcome these plants into your homes and into your lives. And if you like what happens, feel empowered to welcome more of them in every year. Little steps. Great gardens are not installed. They're grown and managed and cared for over time. And you'll find that you yourself will grow along with your plants. So I'll leave it at that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah. Tom, you want to go?
Yeah, mine's going to be short and sweet. Uli, you brought it up earlier. There was the Lady Bird Johnson quote, and I just want to say it because I really believe in it as well. And it's native plants give us a sense of where we are in this great land of ours. I want Texas to look like Texas and Vermont to look like Vermont. In my case, I want New Jersey to look like New Jersey. So
yeah, that's why I love it. Substitute your state. It doesn't matter where you are.
Mine is kind of twofold. One, I love that in this industry, having been involved so long in different aspects or different parts in the industry, I definitely find more of a togetherness in the native plant industry than I have in any other part of the ornamental hort. And all these messages are proving community. We talked about, you mentioned the increase in education. We saw the New Jersey Native Plant Society, I think their membership tripled over COVID. And it became a sense of community for everyone, kind of like I had found for myself, like as a vinyl collector 20 years ago in different groups like Lala and RDO and Mog that no longer exist. They've been replaced by Spotify. But be a part of that community. Be a part of the solution. We can do it together. It's hard to do it by yourself, but there's so much in common with this, and you can all be a part of nature. And it made me think of, since we're talking about quotes, a letter Kurt Vonnegut had written to a high school class just about test yourself, get outside of your comfort zone just to see what you're made of, and just do these things not for profit and not necessarily even to share with community or anyone else, but do these things just for the sake of doing them, to experience them. And I think there's that will help that disconnect that a lot of people have with nature. It's plant a couple native plants, see how pollinators interact, see how birds interact, become part of that interaction yourself, and get lost in it and just see where it goes. Not for profit, not for anything else, not for the sake of doing it for the right reasons, just to be a part of it. And I think that gets lost sometimes, but didn't know I was going to bring up Vonnegut. That came out of nowhere.
Hey, he's one of my favorite authors, so I'm glad you brought him up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, that's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed listening to Uli Lorimer from the Native Plant Trust. For more information, you can visit their website, which is www.nativeplanttrust.org. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Native Plants Healthy Planet presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men for contributing our theme music. Make sure you stream or buy their music wherever you consume your music. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at @nativeplants_Healthy Planet, or at Pinelands Nursery. You can find us on YouTube also at Pinelands Nursery. Don't forget about the question and comment line. You can call us at 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. Ask a question or leave a comment. We'll do our best to play it on a future episode of The Buzz. And welcome to all the new members of the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. We had this huge influx over the weekend, a few hundred new members, and we're happy you're joining our community.
Yeah, so you can buy Native Plants Healthy Planet merch at our website, www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. There's a link at the top that takes you to our Teespring store, and then there's all sorts of designs. Some of them go to specific organizations, but the ones that go to general groups, we kind of pool that up, and then we give it to organizations that we think are really doing great work, boots-on-the-ground type stuff that can make it's a small amount of money, but we think it can make a big impact with those individuals. So You can listen to Native Plants, Healthy Planet at our website, but you're probably going to listen on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, really wherever you consume your podcast. If you can, leave a 5-star review. If you do a little write-up with that review, it goes a long, long way, and then it makes us feel good about ourselves. So we're doing a good job. So
and Tom will give you a shout out.
Yeah, and I'll give you a shout out on the buzz. So and make sure you subscribed, because that also goes a long way with us. So with that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. Uli, thank you so much. We're looking forward to having you for a part 2. Coming up next week, we have a Buzz episode, so make sure you tune in. And until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.